So tell us what is going on in the East Belfast UVF. We're seeing a lot of headlines about it at the moment.
Yeah, there's a lot of headlines about East Belfast, Nicola, and some of it is confusing to say the least. Is he in? Is he not in? And of course, they're referring to Stephen Mackers Matthews, the alleged head of the UVF in East Belfast for many years. Certainly, the BBC referred to him as that, but he has continued in recent years to deny that he ever held such a position. But we were faced with quite a remarkable situation a couple of weeks ago now, where he was allegedly stood down on Remembrance Sunday at midnight on Remembrance Sunday. So did it happen? Did it not happen? But technically, the people who were stood down, perhaps Matthews is one of them, they remain members of a paramilitary organization. So they can't be booted out without being court-martialed first. So that remains the situation. Now, something like this has never happened. It usually resorts to violence right away. But my inquiries reveal that this is something we've never seen before. And I would say the British Secret Service had a hand in this, and probably the Irish government as well, because that's the way things are done these days. And the troublesome UVF in East Belfast, troublesome in inverted commas, because of their connections to drug dealing, needed dealt with, because the previous chief constable has said it was his intention to deal with them. And we have a bigger problem, is we can't get the government up and running because the DUP are could be in hock to the for want of a better word, dissidents within loyalism, and certainly the noises coming out of East Belfast prior to the recent developments suggested that they were holding a gun to Jeffrey Donaldson's head. So everything was in a stalemate, and still is to a certain extent. But there's big hopes for the DUP coming back into government in the near future. But East Belfast was the key to it all. And
so it's kind of a complicated thing, Hugh, for maybe people who don't follow the ins and outs of what's happening in loyalism up in the north. But I suppose the basic thrust of it is the UVF obviously have existed throughout the Troubles, and it's made up of various brigades, I suppose, that split around the country. And as in recent years, there have been a lot of moves and a lot of talks with the government about transitioning away from paramilitarism by the UVF. However, simultaneously to that, you'll see the PSNI are putting out press releases every month about, particularly focused on East Belfast, about drug busts, about involving East Belfast UVF, as the PSNI will say at the time. So even as the UVF or people associated with them are getting funding from the government, in talks with various people about moving away from paramilitarism, there's this other section of the UVF that are being associated with widespread drug dealing. And that's really what's behind all of this, isn't it, Hugh? There is...
That's largely true, and it's true to say. I mean, it's very complicated for people who don't keep up to date, and it's even complicated for people
to do.
Believe you me. But it's true to say, Niall, that the UVF this is historically interesting. The UVF continued to exist in a skeletal form since partition. Since 1921-22, we still had this organization, strangely enough, more so in rural areas along the border and in mid-Ulster, because you remember Gusty Spence, the founder of the reconstituted UVF on the Shankill Road, told me that in 1965 he went to Tyrone to be sworn into the UVF. So it was a kind of rural thing. But your analysis of what you've just said is roughly we have the difficulty of drug dealing. And that has been a difficulty for 20, 30 years. But then we have other people within what you would call mainstream loyalism who have seen the dreadful effects of drug dealing in their own communities. Every year there are deaths of people who would be linked to loyalism, members of their family. I've attended funerals. I was at one with Stephen Matthews, one of his friends, whom I knew. He died. And that is a major problem for the loyalist communities, where ordinary people are complaining to the loyalist leaders that drug dealing is the cause of their problem. And so they're faced with a situation that in order to move into the modern world and accept the government proposals for transitioning, as you call it, they need to distance the drug dealers and get them out of the communities. And the only people that can do that properly are the PSNI. So we have a situation where the grandchildren of the people who controlled the UVF are moving into a much better and more respectable form of representing their communities rather than being drug dealers and gunmen.
And Hugh, exactly that point, the age of the leadership of the UVF and those who are getting the funding. I wouldn't mind knowing what sort of funding they're getting, but they are kind of that veteran that would believe that they can kind of stamp out drug dealing and you know, that sort of old school individuals who I imagine younger crews coming up under them, like drug dealing is almost part of their culture.
Yes. Our photographer sent me photographs today of a funeral of a paramilitary leader called Winky
Ray.
Winky Ray, whose funeral took place yesterday. There was a change even in that. Traditionally, the culture on the Shankill Road, Nicola, was for a paramilitary funeral, the whole place closed down. But it didn't yesterday. The Shankill shops remained open. These aging paramilitary leaders were there, but the shops in the Shankill remained open and things went on largely unaltered. There were just over 100 people there, including the leaders that we speak about. They were all there, but there's a changing place to face the modern world. The Shankill Road and the Falls Road at the nearest point are several hundred yards apart. But both the problematic Republican and loyalist groups who were antagonistic for 30 years have learned to live with each other. They've accepted partition. The IRA has accepted partition, and that any change would have to come through
political means
and persuasion. So they're quite happy to work for their communities within each side. As we said, the Republicans are much better at it at the minute, but the loyalists do know that it's the only way forward, and they're prepared to accept it with a handful of a few growlers on the side.
What would the kind of mean age group of the UVF be? Are they older? Is there younger people involved?
All of the paramilitary groups within loyalism have continued to...
They've continued to recruit, haven't they, through the peace process in a way, certainly. You know, there'd be loads of debates about what exists of the provisional IRA post-ceasefire. But, I mean, the loyalist paramilitaries continued to recruit, continued to sign people in all the way through it. It has been very different, hasn't it?
They always have. And I in the Sunday World, within the last couple of weeks, I was writing, we had some inside knowledge of a meeting of the East Belfast UVF, where the alleged leader was discussing changing with a view to getting their hands on some of this transition money that was available. And his right-hand man said, "And what you meaning, UVF without drugs? That's the reason why I joined it." You know, so you had that type of culture and still have, but that's particularly an East Belfast problem at the minute.
And so there has been a real as you said before, there's been splits within loyalism, plenty of them, and they've nearly always ended up in feuding and violence and shootings very quickly. For example, the LVF split from the UVF at a certain point, and there was huge amounts of killings, and in the UDA there's been feuds as well. Like that, but in this occasion that seems to not be happening, or there seems to be a big effort to make sure that doesn't happen. How are these two groups going to get along with each other now, or what's going to happen?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the LVF, because in recent times, I met with a senior UVF man, and he made me aware that the current day leadership of the UVF did not want an LVF moment. They did not want East Belfast to be presenting them with a violent alternative, and that is why they have done this in conjunction with, as I would say the MI5, the Irish government, and the PSNI, and to another extent the Garda Síochána, were all involved in what happened in East Belfast on Remembrance Sunday.
Like, what sort of numbers are in the UVF, do you know?
You'd be surprised. The meeting at the top of the Shankill Road on Remembrance Sunday, there were 1,000, in excess of 1,000 members. Now, a lot of them were pressed to go to the event because this statement was going to take place. But they can rely on them when it comes down to, as Dominic Behan wrote about the song The Patriot Game, a love of one's country is a terrible thing.
And what sort of, how do they function these days? What do they do? Do they meet? Do they gather? Does the leadership dictate down the lines about this sort of no violence, no drug dealing? Yes, there are all of these issues are passed and are dealt with, and the American government have supplied courses in America for representatives of the loyalist community to go there and learn how the world of democracy works. As it was once said to me, you get more return from a spoonful of honey than you'll get from a spoonful of vinegar. So that's the modern way of looking at things. And that money we're talking about, that they are, being given this transition money, what sort of, is there a wage in that for the leadership? Are they actually earning money for doing it, or does the money go into the group and into the, like, do they meet in community halls nowadays? They can be more open about their meetings and things like that. So have they got that sort of a structure and those kind of expenses?
Yes, well, money is the key to everything, as you say. I was telling someone earlier today, I was over visiting my Scottish friends in England, and they have a farm 15 miles north of London, and I had been working for Panorama, and it was a Sunday, and during that period, the DUP in particular were pressing the British government for more money, massive amounts of money they required. And David Cameron, who was Prime Minister at the time, was refusing. So it was touch and go what was going to happen. So when I arrived at my friend's farm, they had just finished lunch. And one of the guests there was a man who only died last week, Alistair Darling, former Chancellor of the Exchequer. So we all go for a walk, and I ended up walking alongside a guy who was introduced to me as Nick. And he said to me, Hugh, I've had Ulster politics up to here. And he pointed to his forehead. He said, the Prime Minister was pressing me for money last week. And I told him, you can give them this money, but it's only a matter of time before they're back again asking for more. So when I got back to the farm, I asked my friend, who was that fella I was talking to? Because he spoke to me about him speaking to the Prime Minister, and he said to me, you haven't a clue. He said, MPs would kill for 10 minutes of that man's time. That's Sir Nicholas Macpherson, the head of the British Treasury you were speaking to. I didn't even know his first name. But So money is the key to everything. On the radio news this afternoon, I heard an English reporter explaining that when the DUP get up in the House of Commons to ask for money, their Tory counterparts ridicule them by saying in the House of Commons, "Oh, we're getting asked for more money." So they see Northern Ireland, certainly the British see Northern Ireland as a draining cash cow.
See, it's a complicated business, isn't it? Because in the aftermath of the Belfast Agreement, both governments, the Irish and the British government, agreed to fund, organisations for ex-paramilitary prisoners, for transitioning organisations, and they were obviously associated with either the IRA or the loyalist paramilitaries or whatever. And that was all legitimately done. These were set up, companies set up, filed accounts.
And it's state funds.
And it's state funds, and people who were obviously involved in those organisations were being paid and continued to be paid wages. So that's the complicated bit of it, or that's the straightforward bit, but the complicated bit is that the UVF, for all of their transitioning away from an active paramilitary war, that the shadow funding was also going on, and it's not as clear to say the UVF were always openly at least living to an extent off the proceeds of drug dealing. I mean, that is a fact of it, isn't it, Hugh?
It's a fact, yeah. Well, the drugs came in roughly around 30 years ago. E-tabs were the big thing at that time. And the money was dead easy, and no one was being killed apart from the IRA killing a few drug dealers. So the money was easy. They all became quite rich out of it. But then the spin-off happened when their children started dying, their grandchildren in particular. I mean, every year here there are deaths as a result of drugs supplied by loyalist drug dealers.
Yeah, and of course the North in particular has gone through a really, really bad time in terms of drug deaths. Some of it from the kind of more modern synthetic drugs, obviously some of it that you've written about, Hugh.
Yeah.
And then there's also been another burst of deaths again around sort of heroin substitutes and heroin. So it's been ravaged in particular over the last couple of years, I think.
Yes, and all the depression that it brings as a spin-off. People who would have gone on to live decent lives end up practically vegetables, and you see it on the streets as well. It's appalling. It's a major problem. Money is the key to it, as Nicola says, but it requires these groups to be fully participant in government strategies to tackle it. Now, I believe there are a lot of people who want to do that. They are the majority. The elements in East Belfast that continue to see it geographically is different. The river splits Belfast, and geographically from East Belfast, which starts at the river, runs all the way to Bangor and Newton Ards. So it was by far the biggest area. Now, what happened on the Remembrance Sunday could not have happened 20 or even 10 years ago. The power of East Belfast, and I think they were prepared to go down that road to an independent, autonomous group on their own, maybe give themselves a new title. But they were in control, and it took that length of time for people within these communities. I mean, there is a collective sigh of relief in East Belfast from the communities about what has happened.
So tell us who are John Bunter Graham and Harry Stockman.
John Bunter Graham is, I think he's 80 years of age now. And I've actually never spoken to him, but he saw me one day. I went to Gusty Spence's funeral, and I was standing at the side of the church where the coffin was coming out, and he was walking along with another UVF man who said hello to me, and I said hello back. And as they passed, I saw John Bunter Graham lean over and ask the other man who I was. And when he looked back to get a second look at me, but he was, as a young man, he would have joined the first wave of UVF men to come in when the Troubles erupted. So he's been there that length of time, over 50 years, and he's been in a leadership position for certainly over 40 of those years, of those 50 odd years. He would have he would have been involved in terrorism, and he would have been there when at the time of the notorious Shankill butchers, etc. There is a photograph of him where he, as a young man, is standing next to Lenny Murphy and one of his brothers. So he's been there that length of time, but he has stayed the course, which is quite remarkable because, as Niall pointed out, a lot of leaders tend to disappear through internal violence, but he has stayed the course. And when the ceasefires happened, that really was only the start of what we're seeing. People thought that was the end of something. It wasn't. That was the beginning of something else. And he has stayed the course. But he has made provisions for when he will no longer be here, which at 80 years of age, you wouldn't be putting the kettle on for a long life. So he has brought a very interesting thing about the UVF. Unlike any other paramilitary group, the leadership of the UVF is contained within individuals who all live within a small number of streets in the middle of the Shankill, like the 3 or 4 streets. We'd say the 8 people who have controlling roles in the UVF all come from these streets. Their parents were known, their grandparents were known, their children and grandchildren are known, that they are steeped in the community. John Graham was one of them, and Harry Stockman, with whom I've passed a few words recently. Harry Stockman is one of those people. He comes from the community, but he's different again. Now he played his role in paramilitarism. He's no slouch when it came to that, and that gave him street credibility. But he continued to work and hold down a manager's job in the shipbuilding industry until recently, when he took a full-time post within one of these transitional groups. So the wise money's on him to take over when John Graham steps down. He was stabbed in recent years. He was outside the supermarket when he was stabbed by a supporter of a man who was allegedly shot dead by the UVF. He was seriously stabbed, but they reckon he will be a safe pair of hands to see it into the future.
And what kind of age is he?
I would say Harry Stockman, I should know his name, but he's in his 60s.
He's in his 60s.
And he of course, read out, didn't he famously read out one of the statements from the UVF or the Red Hand Commandos, maybe?
Both.
Where they agreed to decommission a certain amount of weapons.
Yeah, both the organisations. Yeah, he was speaking for them. So you don't get doing that unless you're a made man.
Yeah. And why is he called Harmless Harry? Do you know?
Well, the last thing is harmless. I don't know. I don't really know the reason for that. I spoke to him the day before the coronation. I was on the Shankill, and I said, "Hello, Harry," and put my hand out to shake my hand, but he wouldn't shake my hand. He said that in one of my reports, I'd accused him of getting £1 million in transition money for bonfires. But I was trying to explain that I didn't mean him personally, but he didn't want to wait to continue the conversation.
But those two, Bunter Graham and Harry Stockman, they will be seen as being the wing that are pushing the UVF towards transitioning further and moving in that direction.
They are indeed, and John Graham's grandchildren are centrally involved in community development in this. They've been to America on courses. They know how to construct an argument and make a point of view. So hopefully we see changes like that. And as I say, a few hundred yards away on the Shankill Road, the Sinn Féin does this type of thing day and daily, and they now know each other. They exchange events and conversations with each other. These people all know each other. There is a better future for everyone if they follow the government plan.
It's very interesting what you say about how the leadership held throughout the decades from that small little area, those few
And still
streets,
do.
and still do. I mean, there's a hint of mafia about that in a way, you know. But so how did they manage to do that? Was it through fear, through loyalty, or are they in control of the finances, and have they been?
Well, I think you're spot on with the finances is the thing. See, the Shankill was. I remember reading a document. Gusty Spence gave it to me. It's called "The Rape of the Shankill." And in the glory days of the shipyard, there were tens of thousands of people lived in the Greater Shankill area. But in those 3 decades, they have been decimated, and the old slums were cleared out. So the Shankill had that old tradition of you got a job in the shipyard. You didn't need to stick in at school because your grandfather or your father got you a job, and that is the way things went. They had a tradition of service in the British forces. They do have a genuine affection for the British monarchy, and that is the type of lives they lead. They mark things like the coronation. When I was talking to Harry Stockman, he was admiring this huge new mural. And the new murals are a million times better than the old ones, and it was a new one of King Charles. So he was standing admiring that. He would have played a central role in getting the money provided to put that up. They've seen the Falls Road improve, where it's a much nicer place to live because of what Sinn Féin politicians have chased money to get it better. And they've gone down that road without a doubt. But the leadership is still controlled in the few.
In the few, yeah, which is extraordinary. So, in other words, the UVF what is it? Is it currently a community organisation, or is it something that's moving to becoming a political organisation?
The UVF is a paramilitary organisation, without a doubt. It has all the structures of that. But if you have no direct enemy to be fighting, then what's the point of being a soldier when you've no other army to be fighting? So we're in a in-between situation, a transitional, dare I say, transitional period where it is hoped that people who would have been instinctively drawn towards the paramilitary side of things will realize that the only way forward is for to be involved in community politics. At this level, it is community politics. But it was the Shankill Road, I take you back to the 1960s, the early 60s, when Paisley was first emerging. Where did they try to make a political impact first? It was the Shankill Road, when they put up Jim Kilfedder as a unionist candidate, and his intention was to remove Terence O'Neill, the Prime Minister, to remove him from power because he was giving too many concessions to the Catholic community. And it was on the Shankill that was plotted.
But there's no doubt, Hugh, even though we're speaking a lot about transitioning and community organisation, all through the ceasefire up until now, the UVF have remained as an organisation involved in extortion, racketeering, as they call it in America, and certainly the drugs trade. It's not. It may be transitioning, but it has remained involved in those other aspects of what we would call the underworld down here.
Without a doubt, but they've seen the effect of it. I mean, you drive along. I drove you along the Newtonards Road, the inner city part of East Belfast. You'll see the shops all closed because the UVF extorted money from the people who were struggling to keep the doors open in the shops. Eventually, they closed up. It is very much. It became a mafia organization very quickly with the Troubles, and it produced violence. I remember my colleague Martin Dillon, who wrote about the Shankill Butchers and the Dirty War. Martin told me in recent years that he interviewed a top psychiatrist at one of the hospitals who was telling him they were closing one of the psychiatric wards at the Royal Hospital in Belfast. And Martin asked why, and he said, well, we've no patients. And he said, why have you no patients? He said, well, they're all in the paramilitary groups defending their communities. So that created a role for people who should have been locked away in a psychiatric ward. And they were maybe on the fringes of society. They join these groups, they become a killer, and they're suddenly a hero, a local hero. So all of that added to the mayhem that became the Troubles.
Yep.
It's fascinating stuff. So, I mean, can we say, was this step down, or this, cleaning up as such, this public cleaning of the organisation, which you believe involved some sort of communication between the Irish governments and the UK governments, is it just for show? Is it just for face? Or does Bunter Graham and Harry Stockman have a clear path to the future for a UVF that is, does anyone believe they're slowly shaking
I believe, and I've studied them for a long time, the John Bunter Graham, Harry Stockman. I believe they realise there is no other show in town. The crucial thing is, if we leave aside any dissident Republicans, the mainstream Republicanism has accepted the reality of partition, and that immediately reduces a reaction on the loyalist side. I think John Graham and Harry Stockman realise that, and the only way forward is peaceful coexistence, and that's what we'll have in the future.
Extraordinary.
Extraordinary.
Hugh Jordan, thank you very much.